I want to welcome you to this call that's about how to do congregational sanctuary, and which has been an incredibly important tool for keeping people safe in terms of and making it so they are not getting deported and interrupting that process. It's also a really important tool in changing the conversation and dialogue about immigrant rights in the country, and which is, of course, at this moment, an incredibly crucial one. It's been crucial for a while, but especially right now, it's really important. And we really appreciate all of those who have already taken people into sanctuary or worked in coalitions to do that, and are really excited at the interest in this as a tool for interrupting injustice. I want to mention that we have a number of presenters. I'll be introducing them as we go through, and I want to mention briefly a tool that exists for congregations to do this work in a sustainable, spirit-guided way. And that's the Quaker Social Change Ministry module, which is our model, which is a way to do small groups that support one another spiritually and learn intentionally how to accompany the immigrant community in doing this work. It's really a lot about putting the voices and the leadership of migrants at the center of our work. And it takes time and consciousness in order to learn that. And so we'll actually be starting with calls to support congregations that use that model again in September. And you can get the 50-page manual that teaches that whole model at afsc.org/QSCM, afsc.org/QSCM. It teaches both how to do this in a sustainable spirit-guided way, and also how to really intentionally be accompanying the people that you're trying to support. So I just wanted to mention that. Again, welcome. Our first presenter is Mirna Orozco. She's the Sanctuary Communications and Organizing Associate for Church World Service in Houston, Texas. And she's going to provide an overview of the sanctuary movement and a little bit about the national landscape and how many congregations are interested right now. So Mirna, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being on tonight's call. As mentioned, my name is Mirna Orozco. I am with Church World Service, and Church World Service is an organization that has helped coordinate the national sanctuary movement for a while now, helping bring together different sanctuary coalitions and networks to do sanctuary work. And the sanctuary movement has been around for some time, since about the 80s, but over the last 3 years, the sanctuary movement has gained most traction, having had over 29 public cases, of which there are currently 12 active cases in the United States. Many of you have probably heard of cases in Colorado, in North Carolina, Denver, Albuquerque, and Phoenix, where people are currently in physical sanctuary, and we have 10 right now. And so the sanctuary movement has been helping countless families with legal assistance, family reunification, and protection from through. There is a broad network of congregations sheltering and assisting undocumented people and all over the country. Since the election, the sanctuary movement has actually grown. Before, we had about 400 congregations interested and engaged, and after the election, because of the current immigration landscape, that number has skyrocketed to over 800. We are currently gathering and getting more congregations every day that are interested in joining, and we collect these congregations and support them at sanctuary.deportation.org, where we encourage them to sign up to pledge to resist, so that we can continue keeping track of how many congregations are at to provide solidarity. So that's kind of where we are right now. Again, this is a movement that has been around for a long time, and we're seeing rapid growth with the current immigration enforcement landscape in the country. So I'm really glad that y'all are on wanting to learn more about how you can get involved in this growing movement to protect and support our brothers and sisters. So that's a little bit about the movement. Welcome to any other questions that you all may have afterwards, but I'll go ahead and hand it off to the next couple of presenters.
Thanks, Mirna. And again, if you have questions, we're not going to open the lines for questions because of so many people being on this call, but you can send them to questions@afsc.org. Next, we have Jeanette Vizguera, who is a community leader, a immigrant leader in the immigrant community in the Metro Denver Sanctuary Coalition, and she's also lived in Sanctuary. And for this part of the call, Jeanette's going to speak in Spanish, and Jen Piper is going to translate for her as we go forward. So Jeanette and Piper, go ahead. And I want to just say, if it's important to stay muted so we don't have background noise. You can do that on your computer by turning off the little mic that's there, making it mute, or you can press *6 on your phone. Thanks very much. Go ahead, Jeanette and Piper.
Jeanette, ¿estás en la línea? No oímos en inglés. Jeanette.
¿Aló? ¿Se escucha?
Hello, Piper, are you there?
Yes,
¿Se escucha?
We're good.
Okay,
Yes,
Piper, ¿se escucha?
We hear you. Sí. Okay, sí te escucho, Jeanette.
Bueno, mi nombre es Jeanette Vizguera y soy un líder comunitario por 20 años.
My name is Jeanette Vizquera, and I've been a community organizer for 20 years.
Entré en el sistema en el año 2009 y todo el tiempo me ha gustado estar buscando opciones para seguir resistiendo mi caso y el caso de otras personas.
I entered into deportation proceedings in 2009, and since then, and even before then, I've always enjoyed looking for new ways to protect and defend my community and resist deportation and the system we have.
Y en 2013 estuve pensando seriamente en que en Colorado necesitábamos la opción de crear santuarios, ya que no existía en Denver, porque era una manera de resistir, pero al mismo tiempo de retar al sistema.
So in 2013, I was again facing the end of my stay of deportation, and I began to think seriously about how to create sanctuary as a movement in Denver, because in part for my own family and for my own community, but also because it is a very effective way to challenge the system that we have.
Y porque santuario lo solicita la gente inmigrante afectada cuando siente la necesidad de tener una opción para un lugar seguro y seguir resistiendo y seguir luchando.
Because sanctuary to me is an option that allows the immigrant who's impacted to be safe, to continue their fight, and to continue resisting.
En mi caso ahora yo no digo que estoy ofreciendo santuario a las personas. Cuando yo hablo con ellos, yo estoy hablando de opciones, las opciones que tiene cada persona, y cada persona toma la decisión si cree que el santuario es una opción para ellos.
And in my case, part of my work now when I'm in my community is to really talk with people about all of their options, and to include sanctuary as one of those options so that they can decide if it's the right option for them or not.
Ahora, como escucho, ahora hay mucho interés no solo de la gente inmigrante en que existan más iglesias. Hay una gran necesidad basada en la retórica de la nueva administración,
pero también veo que hay más grupos queriendo trabajar en el tema de inmigración y queriendo ayudar a que el movimiento santuario a nivel nacional crezca.
So I also think this is a key moment because there is more interest not only from the immigrant community, but also from so many faith communities who want to become involved because of the terrible policies of this administration, and to want to move forward. And on top of that, there are also many organizations who have not been as involved with sanctuary or who have not been as involved with immigrant rights, who are now interested in supporting our resistance.
La parte más importante, yo creo, de clarificar es que las personas que entramos a santuario o que estamos pensando que es una opción, somos personas fuertes que estamos pensando en que tenemos que seguir resistiendo. Y cuando pasa esto, también es clarificar que nosotros tomamos las decisiones en nuestras vidas, en nuestros casos, en lo que nos afecta en nuestra familia, no la comunidad que nos está o la iglesia que nos está ofreciendo el espacio seguro.
And one very important thing to clarify and to keep in mind is that the person or the individual or the family that claims sanctuary, the people who choose that as the option for them are very strong people who want to continue their fight, who want to resist this system at some level, and that we are the ones who are most capable and most qualified to make the decisions in our case and how to fight our case from sanctuary, not necessarily those who are providing us that space and that platform to resist and to continue to fight our cases.
Porque lo que nosotros buscamos cuando estamos solicitando un espacio seguro a cualquier congregación es tener gente aliada, gente que esté caminando a nuestro lado sabiendo que es un acto moral, un acto de apoyo como aliados, no que la congregación en sí, que mayormente es de comunidad blanca, son los que van a liderar o son los que van a decidir por nuestras vidas. No es así. Este es un trabajo donde nosotros lideramos y las comunidades de fe que estén queriendo apoyar son nuestros aliados.
Because what we're looking for as immigrants, as people who are claiming this space, is for all of you to walk alongside us in this moral and prophetic act that we're taking alongside us in the sacrifice that we're making by entering sanctuary, and to be very clear that the congregation, if we get in a place where they're making the decisions about our lives for us instead of us leading them, it can be very damaging.
Y porque al mismo tiempo es un reto para la comunidad de fe mayormente blanca de entender si realmente el estarnos proveyendo un espacio seguro es porque es un sentimiento o un compromiso que tienen hacia nosotros, sabiendo que no es solo proveer ese espacio, es una estrategia alrededor de cada familia, que cada caso es totalmente diferente, que cada familia tiene diferente dinámica y diferentes necesidades.
And it's a sometimes also a challenge. Can people please mute their phone? I can hear someone else talking. If you're on the call, please mute your phone.
Please mute your phone. You can do that on the computer by clicking the microphone. You can do that on your phone by doing *6.
Thank you. So, Jeanette, voy a traducir otra vez ese partecito. Espérame. So this is important because the commitment that, here in Denver, the majority of the faith communities involved are white and citizen. The commitment that they're making is not only to provide that space, but also to understand that each family in each case is very different and has its own dynamic. And the person who best knows their family and their legal case and their community is the immigrant who's impacted. And so what we're asking is for folks to walk alongside us and to accompany us and to join us and to follow our lead in making this challenge, this systemic challenge to the immigration policies that we have.
Y esa parte sí me gustaría que quede muy claro porque muchas veces nos hacen sentir que nos están haciendo un favor, que por el simple hecho de proporcionar un espacio seguro, nosotros somos los que tenemos que recibir instrucciones de las decisiones que toman o cómo lo quieren manejar. Y es diferente la dinámica que queremos utilizar a nivel locales en cada coalición y a nivel nacional, de entender que son nuestros aliados, de que son las personas que van a estar luchando a nuestro lado, porque cuando hacemos el llamado y ustedes lo aceptan, sabiendo que ustedes no pueden decidir por nuestras vidas, nuestras decisiones, no solo para el individuo, sino para la familia completo. Es la persona afectada que es la que está teniendo el reto más grande de perder su libertad, de estar resistiendo, de estar luchando y de estar sacrificando la libertad para poder hacer un cambio en el sistema.
So I want to be clear, because if we're not clear about the roles or the place that each critical person has in this movement, it can end up, the person who's in sanctuary can end up feeling like the church is doing this as a favor or out of charity or pity. And we know that when allies answer the call from the community and from their faith to engage in sanctuary, it's because you want to be allies and to fight alongside us, and that you understand that the affected community, the immigrant who's entering sanctuary, is making a moral act by sacrificing their liberty to fight for justice, and to do that with great uncertainty, to not know when the case will be resolved. And so recognizing the capacity and the leadership and the ownership that the person who's most deeply impacted and who is sacrificing the most is the person who is entering sanctuary and taking this prophetic act is important for how we move forward together at the local, state, and national level.
Recordando que las personas que estamos dentro de santuario muchas veces entra el individuo afectado sin la familia. Y cuando la mayoría de la gente que nos está proporcionando ese espacio seguro está durmiendo, está con su familia, está pasando tiempo fuera, está conviviendo con la comunidad, nosotros estamos adentro, resistiendo. Y no queremos que nos vean como personas débiles o como personas que tienen que darnos caridad o que somos pobrecitos, porque somos gente fuerte que desde el principio que entramos sabemos que es de tiempo indefinido, que es un sacrificio grande que tenemos que hacer para después lograr cambios, y no solo para nosotros en nuestro caso individual, sino para el sistema y para las comunidades y toda la gente que viene detrás de nosotros.
And one thing to keep in mind when someone is in sanctuary, we are often separated from our families while we're in sanctuary. We're not sleeping with them and waking up to them every morning. And I don't say that out of a sense to ask people to feel sorry for us or to think that we're weak or to do it out of charity, but to be aware that even all of the allies that are working so hard go home every night to their families, to their houses, and that the person who's in sanctuary, it's like a 24/7 resistance, and that we're doing it because we know in our hearts it's not only going to change things for our own cases, but for our communities, and in the short or the long run, it will change the system.
Y porque parte de buscar aliados, y más si son de comunidad blanca, es también entender que teniendo el privilegio de tener una voz, de tener un voto, que son personas escuchadas, pueden ayudarnos a cambiar este sistema que afecta a los núcleos de las comunidades, el núcleo familiar, y que no es una lucha solo de gente inmigrante, que es una lucha de las comunidades, ya que ya nosotros somos parte de estas comunidades.
And part of what is so powerful about Sanctuary is when we bring in allies who are citizens who have more privilege than citizenship privilege, who are also maybe white or straight, you have a voice and a vote in the community already, just by virtue of your privilege, and your support brings that voice and that vote to our movement, and your recognition that we are a part of your community and a key part of your community, and putting your voice and your vote behind us is what makes us successful and gives us power.
También con el entendimiento de que siempre la persona entrando a santuario es la que siempre va a correr el mayor riesgo que las personas que lo están proveyendo. Es un riesgo porque nosotros estamos exponiéndonos a todos. Nosotros somos los que estamos haciendo los retos y estamos enfrentando a un gobierno que es un gobierno federal, no es simplemente querer ser rebeldes porque lo queremos ser.
And to also keep in mind that the person who's entering sanctuary is the person who's really confronting and making a challenge to the federal government. That it's not only about a smaller challenge, but that we're challenging this huge structure. I mean, that we're the ones who are marked by that structure, and who, if sanctuary doesn't work, will be ultimately, separated to another country, to our country of origin. That's not our home. So we're making go ahead. Síguele.
Al final, cuando una persona entra, y esto es para las nuevas congregaciones que están pensando en querer abrir sus puertas, es de que al final del día todos ganamos. ¿Por qué? Porque las iglesias empiezan a tener más gente yendo a sus lugares, sintiendo la simpatía porque están protegiendo a las comunidades, al mismo tiempo que nosotros estamos ganando gente aliada que está luchando a nuestros lados, que estamos educando, que estamos resistiendo, y económicamente también todo el mundo se beneficia. Aquí no hay pérdida, pero sí estamos juntos como comunidad, en alianza, trabajando y luchando por lo que creemos que es justo, haciéndole un reto de frente sin escondernos al sistema.
And finally, to close, especially for congregations that haven't hosted someone yet, when someone enters, it's important to remember that everyone wins and everyone benefits. That the church itself often receives more support from the community, more attenders. It's an opportunity to really deepen your faith and to live your faith. And for us, it's an opportunity to get in close relationship with people who want to be our allies. And when we work together, when we are really together as one community and we walk together, and we're aware that we're all benefiting and we're all doing this challenge to ask the system to change together, that's when transformation will happen. And so it's super important that we keep those things in mind, that we have a mutual benefit and that there's mutuality in doing sanctuary together.
Y creo que la parte más importante es de que este trabajo no termina de que entra una persona y sale. El trabajo no termina ahí porque este es un compromiso permanente de ambos lados, porque hay más gente detrás de nosotros, los que ya estuvimos ahí, los que ya vivimos ahí y salimos. Es un compromiso de salir nosotros, continuar nuestras luchas, seguir haciendo crecer el movimiento, seguir creando comunidad, pero las iglesias también. No es que lo proveo un mes o por el tiempo que lo necesite una persona y después ya no. Es un compromiso constante que tienen que tener también en mente las congregaciones como nosotros como afectados.
And also the commitment that we make to each other when we do sanctuary together is a long-term commitment, and it doesn't end when the person leaves sanctuary, because this is a long-term fight and a long-term struggle, and it's important both for the people entering sanctuary and the people providing the space and the allies who are walking with us to know that we are making a long-term commitment to one another, that it's not only about offering sanctuary one time to one person, but really being in it for the long haul and living into being that community that we all envision, where we're that beloved community.
Y que cada que un individuo entra, estamos aprendiendo, estamos tratando de mejorar, no somos perfectos, tenemos errores. Cada día vamos a seguir aprendiendo basado en la dinámica de cada familia. Y no solo va a ser en una coalición, va a ser a nivel nacional, porque en cada congregación, en cada coalición, en el movimiento completo como en el movimiento local, cada día estamos aprendiendo, y parte de nuestro trabajo es ir mejorando las cosas que no salieron bien para en el futuro poder darle una mejor, se puede decir, comodidad o seguridad a las familias que estén pensando en tomar santuario.
And I think it's important to also recognize that all of the people who enter sanctuary, we're not perfect. We're learning every single day as we lead. All of the coalitions and all of the churches and congregations and faith communities at the local and state and national level, we're living into something totally new together, and we're all making mistakes and we're all learning from them. And we have part of that long-term commitment is to continue to learn together and to grow together into that community, that security, that safety for everyone as we do this work together.
Great.
Y pues
Thank
también
you
a cada
so
individuo
much.
ayudarle a empoderarse.
Yeah. Yo creo que se acabó como hace 2 minutos el tiempo. No sé si hay algo que quieres decir para cerrar y luego hay preguntas y respuestas después.
No, solo eso.
Okay. I was
Thank you.
Time's up. And she said, no, that's good. I'll just wait for question and answer.
Okay, great. Thanks. There'll be more time for that. Thank you both. Thanks, Jeanette and Piper. I really appreciate that. Next on the call, we have Reverend Randall Keeney, who's the priest of St. Barnabas Episcopal Church in Greensboro, North Carolina. And he's going to talk about the process and discernment for becoming a sanctuary congregation, and also talking about how discernment processes are different. So go ahead, Reverend Randall. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. First, no one is allowed to laugh at my accent. I know I'm from the South. I can't really talk about, the way the discernment process should go. I can only tell you how it went with us at St. Barnabas. For us, it sort of grew naturally out of the life of the congregation over the last 20 years. The congregation hosted a fledgling Latino congregation for several years until they grew big enough to go off and begin a separate congregation. And the friendships and relationships that grew out of that time when we were together, or when those two congregations were together, I think had a great effect on the church. And one of the families that came during that time stayed with us at St. Barnabas, and we got to know their story. They were a family from Guatemala that came up and literally walked across the Rio Grande River with mother carrying a 6-month-old child, and had to run and escape through, escape being captured and then search for a place where they could be safe in this country. And for years and years they struggled. But at the end of that little baby that was 6 months old, being carried across the river, became a citizen, and the father became a citizen. But the rules were different then. But they've been part of this congregation for a long time. So that experience of the immigrant community has been a part of our congregation. And I think in any congregation, there are people within those congregations that work in the immigrant community, both with documented and undocumented people, who sort of know the fears and the anxieties and the concerns that people in that community suffer with. Any teacher out there knows what an undocumented child looks like. Any school counselor knows. But the more we encourage our congregations, I believe, to engage that community around us. By doing that, we're preparing ourselves to make a decision about what we can do, not only individually, but as congregations or as groups of people, what we can do. And when I look at the discernment process, first I got to remember what discern means. It means trying to figure out what to do. It doesn't mean doing, making something a foregone conclusion. It means working your way through a process and talking about it. If any congregation that is entertaining the idea of sanctuary, I believe needs to be quite intentional and deliberate in the way they engage one another and their congregation and any church authority that they might have. As an Episcopalian, we have a bishop that we have to report to. I, as a pastor, also have a vestry or a board of my church, and then I have the wider congregation, and all of those have to be engaged. And to try to sum it up, the way it became much more immediate for us was I attended a luncheon once with the League of Women Voters, and Lori Kamala was there talking about a young man named Walter who had come to this country from El Salvador, and he was undocumented and was afraid of being deported, but he also had a wife and a child. And we thought about helping Walter and thought about that, but Walter decided to do something different. He decided to testify on behalf of his wife and his child at their asylum hearings. He didn't get one, but he decided to testify for them. And his testimony led to his wife and his child receiving asylum, but it also meant that when he finished testifying, ICE took him into custody. And he sacrificed his own freedom to protect his wife and his child. And he's now in detention in South Georgia. Additionally, they lost a child that was born and lived only 3 months, and that child is buried at my parish. And the entire congregation experienced that family and their struggle. And each week now, when we come in and out of church, we see that little grave with those beautiful flowers that his mother brings on a regular basis. And we see that and that need and that of people who live, just afraid of what's going to happen in the next hour or the next day becomes very guttural for us. But so we struggled with it and talked about it a long time while he was with us and they were with us working through that. And it didn't turn out that he needed or wanted sanctuary. He wanted to do it a different way for his wife and child. But we talked about that as a vestry, as our board, and we took that idea to the congregation about 2.5 years ago. And then when it didn't materialize with the young man from El Salvador, we kind of unpacked it and continued to talk about it for a little bit, and then we just stopped, and it sat for about a year or so before Lori Kamala called me on the phone one day and asked me if our congregation was still willing to talk about it. And I went and talked to my vestry, and after those years of struggle and meeting all those people, they were unanimous in saying that, yes, they would like to do it. And when we all went to the congregation to talk to them about whether we should do this or not after having those conversations for the last few years, everyone that spoke at the meeting was supportive of doing it. I know there were a few people in the room that were doubtful or probably are not on board with what we were doing, but those folks that have disagreed, in fact, have been particularly gracious. And after Juana has come, have been quite helpful. So I think each discernment process is going to be different, but I think we all need to pay attention to all the stakeholders in this, whether it's a ecclesiastical authority, our board, our congregations. We also need to be aware of the legal ramifications, and so we know we know the ground on which we're about to stand, and make sure that the passion we have for this is strong enough to lead us through, whatever difficulties may come up. But it's so far with Juana, this has been a graceful, loving time, and I know she struggles on a daily basis, not being able to go home, but she's touched a lot of lives, and I know a lot of people in North Carolina are finding out about the struggles of undocumented people through her courage and the work that she's done and the faith that she has put on this issue. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Reverend Randall, for that testimony and that information. Next, we have David Poundstone, who's a member of Mountain View Friends Meeting in Denver and a member of the Metro Denver Sanctuary Coalition. And he's going to talk about logistics of becoming a sanctuary congregation and the principles of accompaniment as you do this work to support the immigrants in the community. Go ahead, David.
So can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So again, my name is David Poundstone, and I'm a member of the Mountain View Friends Meeting. And thinking about this, I think it's quite ironic that I'm talking about logistics because I didn't know anything about this 3 years ago. But I sat this week with a new host congregation in our coalition, and how to approach this topic suddenly became quite clear to me as they were wrestling with a lot of the things to get organized. And so I would like to break this into two general categories. The first just being the initial outfitting and scoping out of what you have to do. Now, obviously, you have to have some kind of private bedroom facility. You have to have a bathroom, and you have to have a shower. Very few churches probably have an integrated apartment like our congregation had because it was a holdover from years before. But, those facilities can be found in the building probably or made to exist, and it can work. And the sleeping room could be small. It could be in the basement, but you can compensate for that with access to larger facility space and other amenities. But I think one of the key questions you want to ask as you try to figure out how this is going to work is, would you want to live in this space? How would you make it better for yourself? And it's also another big consideration is that it's not just the one person who comes into sanctuary. It's really the whole family. We hosted a mother and a 1-year-old child in our apartment, but she had another child who came frequently and her husband. And then there's also the community that comes. And another aspect of being a host congregation is hosting community fellowship and community building events with the extended family, with the broader community, and intentionally living and building our communal relationships. I wouldn't worry too much.
David, this is Lucy. Could you slow down just a little bit? You're
Okay.
being interpreted, and so the interpreters need you to go a little slower. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Another issue that you might begin to worry about would be the furniture. The same consideration about actually who's living in sanctuary, but who might be staying overnight or accompanying the family or the person in sanctuary. So you need to have couches and chairs and maybe extra bedding for overnight stays. And we've also found that providing a TV with cable and internet access is pretty important for passing time as well and keeping people in touch. Most congregations will probably have a kitchen, and so access to the kitchen. I would think the biggest consideration we've had in that regard is, trying to make sure that the guests' food stuff is clearly separated from what might be used for community work or community fellowship. So separate storage, separate labeling, so that your guests' food doesn't disappear. There was a question that I was asked to discuss, and I don't really have a very good answer for this. Was what if there's another facility in the building, like a preschool? And one of the new congregations in our sanctuary coalition does have a preschool in their facility. They did not seem to be very worried about it. They think that it's adequately handled by having separate access to the facility, so that it's not really shared when the preschool is in action. And but there are, as Randall pointed out, issues that you might want to talk about with the parents or the board of the preschool. In this case, the preschool was owned by the church, so that it, is somewhat integrated. So I think those things can be handled. It may raise different issues in terms of licensing and things like that, but they could all be addressed, I think. Another key aspect of your building is also having a place for someone to spend an overnight. We have found it's part of our practice to always have somebody spend the night in the building. Our apartment was upstairs, and so our overnight person slept in the library close to the front door. We just provided a futon and an air mattress, and everybody brought their own sleeping bag, and then rolled it up at night. So it wasn't. The only other thing that you want to consider is bathroom access for that person. One of the key functions of somebody spending the night is to just assure your guest that if there's an emergency, someone is there to help respond. It may happen, especially if you have a child in sanctuary, that you have to make an emergency medical run or something like that. So your guest in sanctuary is not going to have a car there, and so those are just things that you might have to deal with, and it really helps to have someone there, especially in a big, older downtown church. It's a big building. Having somebody else in the building is a comfort. I would emphasize that one has to be very knowledgeable about how the building locks up and keep that well in mind. I can't tell you how many times we found that a door was open when it shouldn't be. And then you also have to have your emergency response procedures posted near the doors, so that if somebody should come, people know what to do, who to call, and people spending the night need to be trained in how to deal with that. The other aspect, that once you get the facility logistics underway, is just the operational organization. And what I observed the other night is it seems very natural that volunteer teams emerge to deal with the various needs of accompanying the person in sanctuary. Some people will volunteer to do the laundry. You probably don't have a laundry facility in a church. Somebody or a group of people will do grocery shopping on a regular basis once you learn the dietary wishes of your guest. And then having people come in and bring food occasionally and share company over a lunch. In our case, our Ingrid and Colada's husband came almost every night, and so the kitchen was kind of off limits because they were having their family meal. But there may also be other children involved, other ferrying people to school. That's another level of volunteers that you need to organize. And if a child is involved, arranging play dates or just giving respite to the mother or the father with the child is important. Another aspect of the operational organization is your communications. I think it's very important to have a clear point of contact, somebody that everybody knows you can go to find how to deal with a situation or refer to for a solution, especially if you get a call from the media, they want to come over for an interview or something like that. Having one point of contact, trying deal with that is very important. So with all these people, and there may be 30 or more people in the period of over a course of a couple of weeks involved in doing various volunteer activities, having some kind of list to coordinate the times for these various activities so that people can sign up. And it's very helpful if people sign up on a regular schedule so that, Joe takes Tuesday nights every week or every other week or something like that, so that you can, comfortably fill out a regular schedule is very helpful. You also have to think about coordinating your schedule with other building uses. Trying to schedule a social event when somebody else is going to use the building doesn't work too well. One of the things that we didn't do too well in our congregation is we don't have any staff in the building, so we don't have anybody to answer the phone, and we weren't very good at responding to calls coming in asking to talk to somebody about our situation. So if you have staff, that's probably easier, and the next time we'll probably figure out a better solution for that. If you have a website, you can use that for sharing information. But somebody asked me about security of communications. I would say you should presume that everything you put on in an email is visible to the world. So be very discreet about what you put in email. And if you are doing planning for some event regarding your guest, that perhaps should not be broadcast to the world, especially on Facebook, until it's ready to be public. And we have also used Signal as a communication tool. There are perhaps others, but I think it's a safe precaution to think that, especially on social media, that your communications are being monitored. I think that's about every thing that I wanted to talk about. Having a phone tree, having people who are nearby available to come on short notice if you have an emergency. Those are all things that will kind of emerge once you begin to think about how to accompany the person in sanctuary, how to respond to their needs. If somebody doesn't show up to spend the night, somebody ought to be willing to take the shift and fill in. It's very important for safety's sake, I think, to have that overnight stay. And I think I will stop there.
Great, thank you, David. Next, I want to remind the presenters that are left that this is being simultaneously translated. So try to speak as slowly as you can so that that can happen. Next, we have Matt Hanley, who's the Director of Litigation for the Washington Committee on Civil Rights and Urban Affairs. And he's going to give us an overview of the legal implications and the potential risks of being a sanctuary congregation. Matt, welcome to the call. Thank you for being available for this. And remember to speak slowly. I also want to remind everyone this call is being recorded so that others can benefit from it. and keep your phones or your computer muted. If you're on a phone, do *6 to mute yourself. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Good evening, everyone. This is Matt Handley. I'm the legal director at the Washington Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights in Washington, D.C. And amongst the areas that we have been focused on, particularly since the election, is trying to provide some level of advice to not only congregations, but municipalities and other organizations and institutions that are considering adopting policies related to sanctuary. I think, as the discussions before this have made clear, sanctuary spans many different things. Assisting with sanctuary runs the gamut from providing advocacy support on behalf of immigrants in trying to change the law related to trying to change our immigration laws in a positive way, all the way to providing actual physical sanctuary, much like many of the congregations that we've heard about here are already doing. And so it's very difficult, or it's impossible to explain in one call or in one conference call what all of the legal risks for every type of sanctuary policy that a congregation may wish to adopt. And I think it's in any congregation's best interest that prior to adopting a sanctuary policy, that it have a one-on-one conversation with legal professionals who can give them very narrowly tailored advice as to exactly what would be what the risks are for their congregation based on what they intend to do. But what I would like to do is to at least give a broad overview of what some of the larger known potential risks are, and encourage anyone who would like to know more to certainly ask questions, but to feel free to contact us or to reach out to others in your area to try to get more narrowly tailored advice. So I typically think of the risks, the legal risks to congregations falling into two categories. The first is what is the risk that the current administration and its relevant agencies like ICE or the Department of Justice will even attempt to impose any sort of criminal liability on providers of sanctuary. So, in other words, what's the risk that anything would even that there would even be an attempt by the government to hold a congregation or its members liable? The other type of risk is if and when the government were to try to impose liability, what is the risk that a court would actually impose liability? What is the risk that a court would listen to the arguments that the Department of Justice might make as to why liability should be imposed? So the first type of risk as to whether or not the administration and its agencies may actually attempt to impose liability is a very difficult one to provide a great deal of guidance on. What we really have to look at is what has happened in the past and use that as some indication of what will happen in the future. But as all of us, find out with each passing day, using the past is not a terribly good way of figuring out what this administration might do in the future. That being said, there is still a ICE memo that is still in place and is still being followed, sometimes known as the sensitive location memo or the sensitive area memo, that has been in place since in its current form since 2011, that does limit enforcement in certain sensitive areas, including places of worship. And that is continuing so far to be followed by the administration for the most part. That memo really discourages ICE from doing enforcement actions in sensitive locations like places of worship unless there is an extreme reason to do so, which would include the various heads of and supervisors at ICE thinking that there is a need to do so, or if there's some major crime that they believe may be going on at the congregation. But for the most part, it is what has discouraged or let many congregations feel very secure that there likely would not be enforcement going on at those at congregations. Now, keep in mind that policy memo is not law. It can't be used as a defense. It can't be, if ICE were to not follow it, that would not be a defense that the congregation could raise to say, well, ICE should have followed its memo. And it could be changed at any time. The administration could decide that it's going to abolish it or change it at any time. But so far, it is still in place, and hopefully will continue to be. Now, the second type of risk that I mentioned would be, well, if the government did try to impose liability? What risks does a congregation and its members and leaders have? What is the risk that a court might say, yes, you have run afoul of our immigration laws, of our harboring statutes, or of our transportation statutes? And that one is a little bit easier to assess, given that our courts are continue to follow precedent and seem to be, at least currently, a lot more of a determinative way to figure out what the law is, how the law is actually being followed. The two main statutes, or it's one particular statute, but the two main provisions of the statute that come into play most often when thinking about this are the harboring statute and the transportation statute, which make it a criminal offense to conceal or harbor or to transport an undocumented immigrant if doing so would substantially facilitate the immigrant's evasion of the law. What it means to harbor or to transport under the law differs depending on which part of the country you live in. As many of you may know, the federal system here is made up of various circuits, and different circuits geographically have interpreted this law in different ways. And so it's yet another reason why, if you're actually trying to determine what law how it's going to be interpreted where you reside, it's worth having a one-on-one conversation with an attorney to try to determine that. For the most part, most courts say that the harboring statute means that you have to substantially facilitate the presence of the immigrant being here unlawfully, and that substantially facilitating doesn't mean merely providing shelter. It normally means actually physically concealing them and hiding them from being found by authorities. And depending on what a congregation is wanting to do or who it's wanting to help, I think one has to ask whether or not you're trying to be open and notorious about the provision of asylum, like Ms. Vizguera situation who spoke earlier. That was a very, open and form of asylum where she and the churches where she stayed were advocating on her behalf, and there was no actual attempt to conceal her from the eyes of the authorities. Those are going to run the likelihood that runs afoul of the law is going to be much smaller than if you're actually physically concealing and trying to hide someone from the authorities. Similarly, on the transportation issue, merely transporting someone to a doctor's appointment or to visit their lawyer or to do something else that is a necessity of life is probably not going to run afoul of the law, but transporting them in an effort to evade the authorities is much more likely to be something that is going to run, that would carry with it the risk of liability. So again, as I mentioned, it does vary from different part of the country to different part of the country. Interestingly enough, the part of the country that has some of the worst law on this right now, or the most unfavorable to sanctuary, is the Ninth Circuit. So California and other states in the West, where there have been cases that have said that the mere act of sheltering can run afoul of the harboring statute, whereas most other parts of the country have said that that is not sufficient. And so it is worth having a very detailed conversation, at least in my opinion, before deciding what exactly is the right fit for your congregation. And so I will wrap up there and again encourage anyone to either reach out to us or to others, because we would be very happy to try to assist.
Thanks so much, Matt. And last, we're going to have, as of the presenters, we're going to have Jen Piper, who is our interfaith organizer in Denver, and works very closely with the Metro Denver Sanctuary Coalition. And she's going to talk about forming a coalition and deferring to immigrant leaders, really following their lead, and how to get connected with immigrant groups. So go ahead, Piper.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being on this call. I think there's a couple of main pieces to think about. One is really how to get into, if you're not already, into some deep relationship and connection with the immigrant community. We have a document from AFSC called 7 Steps for Faith Communities on Immigrant Rights, and most of them are really about places to look or activities that you can engage in to begin accompanying, if you're not already, to connect, if there's not immigrant rights groups in your area, with other faith communities who are immigrant-based, or also with faith communities who are immigrant-based. We know that immigrants make up a much larger percentage of people in the U.S. who identify as people of faith. That's how the work, my work started in Denver, was a request from the immigrant community to engage the faith community in their struggle and to bring a moral voice and a spiritual support to their movement. I think it's a slow process, and it's an ongoing process. So even though many of the congregations in our coalition have been engaged on immigrant rights for almost a decade, we continue to learn, like Jeanette said earlier, from each other and from the immigrant leaders in our coalition. Why is a coalition important? I think it's important for a couple of reasons. One of the goals that Jeanette mentioned for our movement is also to create systemic change, to create a situation where we're changing the narrative and the dialogue. And part of that is a real call for those of us who are citizens and people of faith to engage and educate our own community as well. And the more congregations that we reach, the more places that enter into this discernment process, the more people really learn about how punitive and how punishing our system really is, our immigration system. The other reason that it's important to have a coalition is because when someone is living in sanctuary, it really takes a lot of the pressure and the isolation off of both that individual and the host congregation. The host congregation is the public face and public voice of providing sanctuary in many cases. So there's so much generosity and interest that comes from the larger community and from the media to have support congregations who will help with overnights, who will provide not only logistical support, but spiritual support for the host congregation and for the person living there, has been really critical to some of the successes we have had. To know that if you're overwhelmed, you can turn to a partner congregation and ask for people to come pray or to answer the door. It creates that community of support and of resistance and of faithfulness to be accountable to one another and know that no one of us has to carry the whole load. So in our coalition, we have a host congregation role, and which is really tasked with providing the space, a means of logistics for people and volunteers to plug in, to really provide the care and the spiritual and moral support for the person in sanctuary. And then we have support congregations whose commitment is financial and volunteer-based, but also really providing the creativity and the kind of feeding of the host congregation and the person in sanctuary's soul and kind of momentum and being able to name when maybe we're tired or when things feel impossible to help lift one another up. And then when there's not someone in sanctuary, it's really an opportunity for us to continue to accompany other folks who are facing deportation, to work to prevent them from needing sanctuary, to hopefully intervene earlier in the community and bring our spiritual, financial, and organizational resources to these very strong folks who have often been fighting their deportation by themselves with a lawyer maybe for years. And so we can come in and kind of, again, provide a space of saying you don't have to shoulder all of that alone, and we care for you. We also have really tried to stay focused not only on bringing a faith voice to the larger public, but keeping spiritual practice as a part of our coalition, to have reflections and prayer at every meeting, because in the face of all of this uncertainty, that's what keeps us moving forward and really sustains us. We decided early on to keep our coalition into a smaller geographic area because in order to really be engaged and be in relationship, we have to be close enough to one another to actually touch each other sometimes. But we've been supporting other coalitions in their formation in other parts of our state and around the country. And I think that's important too, where it's not possible to have a coalition, maybe because it's a rural area or an area that's not ready to join you in that voice, to reach out to other places that are doing it. Every single sanctuary congregation who's doing it now has talked to 3, 4, 5 other sanctuary congregations to learn what they've learned and maybe make different mistakes or avoid some of the pitfalls that others have learned from. And I've found everyone to be very generous in sharing and very humble in sharing what they've learned, the mistakes they've made, and sort of their best tips. So I'll stop talking because I feel like people probably have a lot of more specific or burning questions, and I want to make sure we have time for that. But I also want to offer that the coalitions around the country are open to those conversations or places where you might be stuck. So thank you all so much for being on and for being a part of, changing and transforming this system.
Great. Thank you, Piper. So we have about a little less than 20 minutes for your questions. And I'm going to turn this over to Lori Kamala, who's the director of the North Carolina Immigrant Rights Program for AFSC and the interim coordinator of the Sanctuary Everywhere initiative. So go ahead, Lori. Thanks a lot.
Hi, thanks a lot, Lucy. I hope that you can hear me. see. So I have been receiving questions from various people. I've got lots of questions. We'll see how many we get to. The first question is one I've also gotten from many other people. So this person writes from Arizona, from Southeast Arizona, in a rural and isolated area with only 4 to 5 people interested in offering sanctuary from the congregation. What do you recommend? Do you think that we have enough people to do this, or how should we proceed? So I think I'm going to ask, David or Mirna to respond based on your experiences.
And please remember to unmute yourselves, folks, as you answer.
Thanks for that reminder.
This is Myrna. I can take that question if David isn't on anymore. And so thank you so much for asking it. I think local groups, it doesn't really matter where you are, that are interested or congregations that are interested to get started. It's always helpful, and the act of wanting to do so is really important. And so there's a lot of tools that folks can use that are available, whether it's providing physical sanctuary to showing up with people and their courts, offering accompaniment. There's an array of things that people can do depending on where they're at, and there's a toolkit on sanctuary.notdeportation.org, and I know others have it as well, about how to build a coalition, how to provide sanctuary, what things faith leaders can do a coalition, but want to support on the website available for you under the resources tab, and actions that you can take at whatever stage of the process that you may be in to help or provide solidarity.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mirna. Another question I will bring from Davis, California. Do all the facilities for the person or family in sanctuary have to be in one building? Can the people in sanctuary move from building to building on church property? And the second part of that question is, if there is no shower, can a church host a person or family in sanctuary? And I'm wondering if, David, if you'd like to take this question, if you're still on.
What I've understood is the church property is enough, but I think it has to be, on the same campus. I thought there was a case in Southern California in the Los Angeles area where somebody stayed in a house, that was behind the church. But that was all on the same property. I don't know how it may, the shower thing is, I think, going to be the minimal hygiene tool. I don't know how well you could do anything without some kind of bath facility. I think it would be pretty inconvenient, but I think it can probably be you can find enough volunteers to figure out how you could install some small shower in a bathroom area. The one new host congregation we're looking at coming on board, was going to convert the second stall in a bathroom to a shower. So you could get creative about it, I think.
Thanks, David. I wonder if you wanted to speak to that as well, Randall, and share what happened at St. Barnabas and what you all are doing about the premises question. Let's see, Randall, if you are on, please unmute yourself so we can hear you. Okay, well, since we can't hear Randall, I know that they did, St. Barnabas did have to install a shower at the congregation, and that my understanding is also that they are treating the, and actually, Matt, if you could speak to that, if regarding the premises, if people can move around from building to building.
Yeah. So again, there's probably no one. It's hard to answer with some certainty, but there is, as David mentioned, I think best practices for sort of maintaining that you're providing sanctuary, and it's all within what is termed a sensitive area or sensitive location, is that it should be fully within the church's premises, or the whatever, or the places of worship's premises, because keep in mind that the sensitive location is, yes, it's something that ICE has said it will not provide enforcement actions, but it's also a place where it knows potentially that all it has to do is stay just outside of it, and potentially they'll be able to very easily locate and find people who may, as they come and go out of the sensitive location. And so if where they're staying is not very definitively within the place of worship's premises, I think that the risk of the sanctuary not actually being effective probably goes up.
Thank you. That's very, very useful, Matt. There we have some other questions here, mostly related to logistical issues. So one congregation is working on a monthly budget to support their sanctuary guests. What expenses, this is a congregation that is moving towards becoming a sanctuary congregation. What expenses should we budget for in addition to food, clothing, laundry, internet, and cable? Have you had unexpected expenses? I think maybe we'll ask that to David again.
Well, some of our unexpected expenses had to do with fixing plumbing leaks. It wasn't anything extraordinary. We recently budgeted, about $2,000 a year to help support people buying groceries. Didn't want it to all, people are very generous in contributing out of their own pockets, but we didn't want that to be a constraint. Our budget also includes a line item just for the Sanctuary Coalition itself. What we found, and I think speaking for the Sanctuary Coalition, is that the situation could vary by depending on the sanctuary guest's case. If that person who's entering sanctuary was the breadwinner for the family, the financial risks and exposure of the family are significantly higher. And so the Sanctuary Coalition, not necessarily the congregation itself, needs to be prepared to help the family meet costs to cover their rent or things like that, and cover their other living expenses. If the person is not the breadwinner of the family, then the costs are not quite as great to the family, and the breadwinner is making money and contributing to the other costs, and so you have those varying situations. Another big area of cost to consider, and this is again a coalition point of view, is helping support the legal costs. There's a tremendous amount of legal expense that goes into fighting a case. I'm just astounded at the numbers. Our coalition has made it a policy not to try and cover all of those costs, but to help the person in sanctuary, develop their own fundraising plans, but to contribute to helping support those costs. I can't speak to it anymore in much more detail because I don't know them, but that's kind of the framework that we followed. So
thanks, David. I think that that's a great answer, and more questions are coming in, so I want to keep it moving. Let's see if this is a great question here that just came in. If the people visiting the sanctuary guest are also undocumented, is there a danger that ICE will easily find them? I think Matt spoke to that a little bit, but Piper, I'm wondering if you want to speak to that anymore in your experience. Piper, if you could unmute yourself if you are not muted. Okay, well, I can't hear you, so we're going to go on and see if Mirna, is that a question that you could answer? Have you had experience of that? If people visiting the sanctuary guest are also undocumented, have people felt at risk, or how has that worked?
Well, I haven't had too much experience with that. We do know that family members have visited, and as long as they're inside of the church, that's usually okay. I mean, it's the same protection about the safe locations policy that ICE usually follows. However, it's definitely up to the individual and their level of risk, because if this is a highly publicized case, or if ICE is taking active enforcement or wanting to wait for this person to come out of sanctuary, that's definitely a risk that the person needs to know about. However, once inside of the congregation, it would be the same kind of protection as the person in sanctuary would be taking.
Okay, good. Thanks a lot. And I'm going to take a question for Jeanette. If Jeanette, if you're still on, I'm wondering if what was the most helpful thing for you being while you were in sanctuary that community members could offer? What was the most helpful? Janet, no sé si todavía está en la línea. Okay, we'll see if we can get Jeanette back on. We'll just keep moving right now since we are rapidly running out of time. Okay. Next question concerns.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yes, Jeanette, go ahead. Would you like to speak in English or in Spanish?
In Spanish.
Okay, that's fine. I can interpret since Piper's having some trouble getting back on. Go right ahead.
Bueno, pues lo que más ayudó en el tiempo que yo estuve ahí es que estuvimos trabajando con los comités, viendo qué eran las necesidades, la estrategia de seguridad más que nada, y que
so while
todos
I was in
estábamos
sanctuary, we were
bien
working
coordinados.
We were working with the committees we were working with the various committees who were helping out on the security plan and the different committees, and that was really helpful. Okay, adelante.
Había más personas en los diferentes comités de los que se quedaban a dormir ahí, me hacían sentir segura, los que proveían comida, ya que siendo organizadora me estuve trabajando más dentro del santuario que afuera, y pues la gente entendía que a veces eran 2 de la mañana, 11 de la noche, y yo todavía estaba trabajando, organizando, y me llevaban comida. También ayudaban con mis hijos en cuanto a llevarlos y recogerlos de la escuela, todo lo que necesitaba adentro, pero también yo creé un comité de gente de aliados que no tenían que ver con santuario para tener también una respuesta rápida. Se habló también de tener el comité de respuesta rápida en casa.
Déjame interpretar, por favor. So one of the things that was very helpful for me were all of the people who served on various committees, like the people who stayed overnight, the people who brought food, the people who picked up my kids from school. I was working constantly all the time, and people were there beside me from whether it was sometimes I was staying up until 2 a.m. or 11 p.m. still working on various things, and there was always people there supporting me, beside me. It was also really helpful to have a group of allies that was not necessarily connected just with the sanctuary part, but who were connected with a rapid response network outside of the church. Adelante.
Y pues me sentía muy segura. Yo hablaba de que me sentía en una esfera de cristal donde todos me cuidaban, todos me protegían, me sentía querida, amada. Pero como digo, es un compromiso tanto de las personas que están brindando el espacio como de nosotros también crear comunidad, porque yo no dejé de trabajar adentro, me mantuve activa, estuve creando eventos también para colectar fondos directamente para mí, para no tener que estar pidiendo a la coalición o a la iglesia, pero al mismo tiempo la misma comunidad estuvo donando a los tres sitios, a la coalición, a la iglesia y directamente a mí. Entonces, cada familia es una dinámica diferente.
Okay, muchas gracias. Voy a interpretar esto y después seguir otra pregunta. So it was really wonderful for me. I felt very safe. It was almost like I was inside this crystal ball where I felt very loved and very cared for. It was really a commitment that we all are a part of, and to create community. And I continued to work the entire time. I was raising funds for my own case. I was raising funds for the coalition. There was all of these different funds we had to do and raise money for, and so it was a lot of work. But it was also a safe space. So thank you so much, Jeanette. I think we'll go on to maybe...
Okay, si ya no tienen preguntas para mí, necesito salir, tengo otra junta.
Está bien, perfectamente bien, Jeanette. Muchísimas gracias. Ya se va a acabar la llamada.
Okay.
Okay. So Jeanette is on her way to another meeting, so she's going to go ahead and go. So I think we'll try to do one more question and then close it up. Let's see. Let's see. The last question I think we can ask is, in your experience, I think this question will be for David or Myrna. In your experience, have you ever had a situation where police or ICE have come onto the premise?
So the simple answer I tried to say was no. We never saw ICE anywhere near our building. We had people keeping an eye out. Some people were very nervous that, we have a lot of public parking in the area. And so we finally got used to the fact that nobody was surveilling us. That may be different in a downtown situation. Where Jeanette was an urban metropolitan location with a lot more traffic. That presents different security issues. People coming into the building, they employed a team of people to just answer the door so that the staff was not always troubled by the doorbell.
Thanks, David. Thank you so much for that. And Myrna, I will just ask you if you have any example of a success story that you want to share to take us out. And we still can't hear you. I don't know. I thought that we heard you for a minute.
Sorry.
There we go.
No, I think there's various success stories that have come out of the sanctuary movement. As I mentioned earlier, out of the cases that we've had in sanctuary before, there's definitely been many of them that have gotten relief from deportation. I mean, a lot of them have come out from Colorado. Jeanette's story is one. Ingrid's story is another, where they've been in sanctuary and thankfully have received reprieves from deportation. So it's definitely possible, and I think that the more people that get involved, the more we're likely to win in these situations. So we continue to see it, and we continue to encourage people to take this as a step if they see necessary. But I mean, Jeanette's story, who was on earlier, is one clear example of a success of what can happen when people enter sanctuary, have a supportive congregation and community behind them, that it is possible to win.
Thank you to all of our speakers, and Lucy, do you want to close us out?
Sure. Thanks for everybody. Thanks to all of you for joining the call and being interested. And obviously, there's a lot of work to do to support the immigrant community in this way, and to change the conversation about policy. And I'm grateful for you being on the call. Thank you to all of our presenters. It was really valuable and important information. This call was recorded, and it will be posted very soon on our website. we'll send an email to anybody registered and let you know so that you can share it with others. And we are available with resources and information if you need support as you further consider this with your congregation. You can find out a lot of information on our website at afsc.org, Sanctuary Everywhere. And again, I really, really want to thank you all for being on the call, and to all of our fabulous presenters, and to the people who did translation for the Spanish version of this call. Thank you so much. And to Lori for doing the question moderation. Thank you very much for joining us. And good night.